Okay, it's January 3rd, 2019.
Yeah.
This is Paul Power bringing to you another reading from Keys, Love Letters from God, when we are on number 21, called Interpretation.
Yeah. Okay. Interpretation. Interpretation is based upon perception, as is all else. More than this, however, interpretation is a pivotal point, which elicits within you either a response or a reaction. The way you interpret your world and all cognitive detail therein is based solely upon your perception of yourself. Perceive that which is true, and you will interpret events, words, and deeds as being unthreatening. If you perceive separation, you may well view the most loving actions as hostility of some kind. Perception of truth and innocence disarms a seemingly threatening interpretation and retires it. I, on the other hand, interpret nothing. Mine is the guiltless state. Remember, state of grace, the kingdom of heaven, the guiltless state? And I offer you the same. Interpretation is an activity limited to any plane of consciousness in which a choice is necessary to be made between response or reaction. A reaction is based upon a false interpretation of threat, which follows the delusion of separation. A response is an interpretation based upon the perception of wholeness. So here we have a reaction on one hand based upon an interpretation of threat, based on the concept of the false god of separation, where a response is an interpretation based upon perception of wholeness. A reaction answers a perceived threat with fear, harm, and further separation. A response promotes wholeness, a shared relationship of love, regardless of what is being offered in the first place. Beyond the need for such choice, the need for interpretation does not exist. Think about it. Beyond the need for a choice between reaction or response, the need for interpretation beyond that doesn't even exist. See how free we can be? For it simply is a form of communication with yourself and your brothers and sisters. With the dawn of wholeness comes the end to the need for interpretation. True communication, however, is based in acceptance unconditionally. With interpretation may come the need for complexity, judgment, obligation, and separation, and guilt, which is a form of obligation. With the vision of wholeness comes the simplicity of an unjudged and unjudging. Think about that. Remember when God referred to himself as the unjudged and unjudging and invited us to be likewise? I'll read it again. With the vision of wholeness comes the simplicity of the unjudged and the unjudging. Within the relationship is offered the vision of wholeness. For herein is my son freed from the need for the choice between response or reaction. The need to interpret your world is in truth based upon your need to control your world. You have been taught that understanding leads to acceptance. That is not the case. Understanding lends itself, I'm sorry, I'm botching up on that one. Understanding lends itself to conditionality and control, and even to separation. It can be the fuel with which powers false gods. Think for a minute. We often say things like, I got to understand this, or I got to wrap my mind around this, I got to get my head around this. In many cases, understanding is our attempt not to understand but control. You know, for generations, and especially since the 1970s, we've been taught that understanding is the way to peace and harmony. No, not really. Again, I'm going to read that part where he said, it can be the fuel which powers false gods. In acceptance itself, it allows you to experience the relationship which you and I are in wholeness. And that's in boldface type. It is acceptance itself which allows you to experience the relationship which you and I are in wholeness. For in such is my vision of your perfection. Beyond this is the need for security, which also generates the need for the choice of interpretation. Any attempt to interpret your world and events therein is an attempt to control your brother and sister. And such may even be an attempt to control me. Fat chance of that happening? No way. Interpretation, then, is a delusion based upon fear, and he put in parentheses, false evidence appearing real, and fueled by conditionality. As I have told you, illness in any form is an opportunity for healing, the restoration of your state of perception to that of wholeness. So illness is an opportunity for healing, which is restoring our perception to wholeness. You don't restore wholeness. It can't be done. Wholeness has always been. It's here right now. It's our birthright. So what you do is you restore the focus of your perception to wholeness instead of perceiving something less or fearful or damaging. When perception is cleared, interpretation ceases to operate. In the real analysis, interpretation becomes a blockage to the perception of reality as well as a blockage to a long and healthy life. I assure you that with the act of interpretation comes worry, fear, reaction, and aging. If you wish to be free from such, you must free yourself as you free a friend. It's understood that the word friend in its ancient term meant free, freedom or free, to free. This is the only way. I am the relationship which allows this freedom to be realized. I therefore await your invitation to join you in true freedom. My voice is simple and needs no interpretation, and if you listen for it, then neither will you need such. To allow this state of grace to be within you, you must ask yourself whether you can truly be threatened or not. You must then ask, who with the capital W you really are. Based upon your answer will be your need or lack thereof for the delusional process of interpretation. So if you know your God, the need for interpretation dwindles, goes away. If you think you're less than God and damageable, then you will probably need to interpret everything because you're going to need to control everything. So don't. I know, I get dramatic. The entire scope of human activity is therefore reduced to a point of perception. Now what do you perceive? Guilt or innocence? That's what it all boils down to, huh? Within the perception of guilt, there is the need for mistrust and even something so simple as life itself. And there are times, let's face it, all of us, myself included, when we end up maybe distrusting life even. Within the perception of innocence comes the opportunity for the blessing of a life abundant. This is my gift to you, my beloved. With the end of the need for interpretation comes the fulfillment of my prayer to you for a happy life, clear vision, a good meal with loved ones, rest at your day's end, and peace at your life's end on earth. In loving recognition of you, God. Notice right at the end there, he actually linked back to one of the first letters in Keys, when he was saying that he prays to us, and what is his prayer for us, and this is his prayer for us. So, now, this ends the first third of the book Keys. Not going to get into it tonight, but the next time we start will be the second section, second third. The title, which links back to the letter on the kingdom, is "The Kingdom of Heaven is neither a when nor a where. It is a who. That who is you." So we'll pick up with there when we pick up again.
I'd like to just go over he disparages the word understanding.
Yes.
And I mean, the whole, on one level I kind of see what he's saying, but you know, when he links it to interpretation and how it's a less than and a thing of controlling. But I mean, I have a hard time understanding this one. You know, I mean, the whole reason people, you know, are listening to these videos is to understand the nature of God. So why is he, you know, attacking that word that we so...
He's not attacking it. What he's offering is not understanding God, knowing God, being God. Because if you understand something, there's still that hint of division between you and it. Let's say there's something or event out here that you feel the need to understand. It doesn't make you become that event. It gives you a chance to control that event or to control some part of you about that event. And what he's saying is interpretation, use knowing instead of understanding. Mm-hmm. Don't try to understand God. Know God. Be God.
Okay.
You know, so that's all he's not trying to attack our minds. You know, our mental processes.
So, in relationship to anything other than God, the usage of understanding is fine and helpful.
Yeah.
It's just as it applies to God, it's the wrong way to approach it.
Yeah, he views it as something we normally use as a means to wrap our head around or wrap our mind around or get some control of in our thinking about. And he's saying to lay interpretation aside, and that means you can lay understanding aside and get to knowing without judgment, without reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It all, I'll tell you what, and it just came to me. It all comes down to one aspect: the choice of love or fear.
Mm-hmm.
If we're coming from love, that's eternal. If we're coming from fear, that's temporary and therefore illusional and delusional.
Mm-hmm.
So every act and thought we have is either coming from our true identity of love,
Right.
or it's coming from something that we don't need. Poison.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.